today, Shara. Not only do I get the opportunity to be a fellow with her in this program, I also get to call her my friend. Um, and that's, such a gift that I get to have of this program. Before I came in here, I did not know how to be a good friend. I was always just thinking about how I could use people and take advantage of people. And Shara is such an example of being a good friend. She's reliable, consistent. She shows up. She's of service, and she's just an incredible person. And so I'm really grateful to be here today and to hear her story and to have everyone hear her story today. When thinking about introducing Shara, I thought about in our literature in the big book of Alcoholics Anonymous on page 32, it says, "So we think cheerfulness and laughter make for usefulness. Outsiders are sometimes shocked when we burst into merriment over a seemingly tragic experience out of the past. But why shouldn't we laugh? We have recovered, and we have been given power to help others. Everybody knows that those in bad health and those who seldom play do not laugh much. So let each family play together or separately as much as their circumstances warrant. We are sure God wants us to be happy, joyous, and free. We cannot subscribe to the belief that this life is a vale of tears, though it once was just that for many of us." And this passage makes me think about Shara and her story. And I'll obviously let her tell that, but seeing the way that she has found recovery, that her family has been reunited, her patience and the program and the process, and watching her be a mother to her child is such a gift and a joy. And it gives me hope in my experience and healing with my family and us healing individually and collectively, that we get to see the joys and the gift of this program. And so with that, I am very happy to introduce Shara.
Hi, I'm Shara. I'm a grateful alcoholic. I am so honored to have been asked to speak at this meeting. Yeah. So my sobriety date is December 2nd, 2022. But I'm gonna take you guys a little bit further back than that. We're gonna talk about like how it was, what happened, and what it's like now. It's kind of like what I'm gonna stick to. Um, So growing up until about the age of 5, I had a very normal life. My mom worked as a newspaper route deliverer because she was a single mom. And so she took me everywhere with her. She didn't want me to be in daycare. She was a single mom, just did everything. But one night, my mom was going to deliver a paper up 2 flights of stairs. And on her way down, the light bulb went out, and my mom fell down 2 flights of stairs and she broke her foot. If you know anything about working a paper route, it's 365 days a year. You don't get a day off. And if you can't work it, somebody else takes your job. So that was really difficult for my mom to admit that that was going on. And so my mom ended up working and walking on that broken foot for 6 weeks. And then by the time that she did seek help, she made two less to get Medicaid, but too much to pay for it on her own. So slowly but surely, I kind of watched this like really normal life that I had fall apart. We were living in Florida, right outside of Lakeland, and I would get to go to SeaWorld, and my mom was a very hands-on parent. And then after that, I saw my mom like really slowly deteriorate. I've been really fortunate that both of my parents were not alcoholics. I never really saw them drink. My mom would have a beer a year in the fridge. Um, and my dad, like, he wasn't super involved until later in my life, but even then, I never saw him drink or get drunk. But the whole rest of my family are addicts and alcoholics. So I was warned for a very young age, like what would happen if I did, or what could happen, I guess I should say. And so I watched my whole life fall apart when I was really young. And so I think that that's really where my black and white thinking started to come into play, which I found to be a really big part of my alcoholism and that cycle later on. And so from there, we went to Germany for a little while, but then we went to Boise, Idaho. And about 2 years after my mom broke her foot, the state of Idaho paid to have her foot fixed. But I never really saw my mom after that. Like my mom, the one I grew up with when I was little, she struggled really heavily with mental illness. There was a lot of neglect, a lot of abuse, emotional and physical in my life. And so that really shaped me from a very, very young age. And I picked up my first drink. I went to live with my dad. It was the first time I'd really ever gotten to know him. I was 12 years old, and he had a bottle of apricot brandy sitting on the kitchen counter. And I thought to myself, I'll just try it. Because my mom was really protective. She was very protective. And so there wasn't a lot of freedom with my mom, but then when I moved with my dad, all I got was freedom. He worked as a high school janitor. So he actually went to work about the time that I got off of school, and he wasn't home until about midnight. So I kind of learned how to run amok. And at this time, I was living in Chicago, about 20 minutes outside the city with my dad. So yeah, that apricot brandy sitting on the counter. I remember because I was really trying to think about my first drink. And I remember going to the bottle and I poured a little bit in a mug and then I drank it. And it was like this release inside of me when I picked that up and I drank it. And I remember going back to that bottle a few times and taking little bit by little bit because I was smart enough that I didn't want my dad to know that I was drinking it. Uh, but inside, I really needed it. And I needed it to be normal because of all the trauma that I've endured in my life. It made me a shell of a person. I didn't have an identity pretty much until I got sober. I was a very big people pleaser because that was my way of surviving. And yeah, once I picked up that first drink, like that was really it for me. But then I decided to go on to the harder stuff, you know? I was like, let's get some Jaeger in here. So at like the age of 15, I was drinking a lot of Jaeger. And I don't even understand how I didn't get in trouble with the cops with this one story. But I was at a park with my friend and we are drinking Jaeger up in the playground. And these other older people show up. So I think I was about 15 or 16 at the time. And all these other people show up and they're hanging out. And my friend, her name was Katie. My friend Katie goes, "Sharing is caring." And she like puts the bottle up. And so then we start hanging out with this group of people. Well, we're at a park after dark. And so here come the cops. And here I am. I think the people I was with was actually 21 at the time or close to. Um, and the cop was talking to them, but I wouldn't shut my mouth. I was just blabbering on, and the cop goes, "Hey, you come here." So I walked up to the cop car and he like asked me some questions and I was like really spot on, like all of his questions. So he ended up just going like, "Hey, like just get out of the park. It's after dark, go somewhere else." And so we left. But it's interesting when I look back because I had to moderate that first drink that I had, so my dad didn't know. But after that, like there was no moderation until later in my story when I really tried to control my drinking. And so I was getting blackout drunk. It was probably that New Year's after my first drink, so probably just a few months after. I just needed that blackout. I couldn't be myself. I didn't know how to talk to people. My thoughts were extremely loud, negatively towards other people, also really negative towards myself. But drinking kind of helped lower that to a point where I thought that I was able to be myself and like function to a level. Um, and then a few years later, so at 16, I got married. I got married and he was 3 years older than me. We were married for 3.5 years, and I supported him through our entire relationship until we got a divorce. Um, and there was some drinking in that relationship, but there wasn't as much that there was like in my teenage years. But then when I got out of that relationship, which it was abusive, because that's like a cycle in my life. But I got out of that relationship and then I found another person who, made my nervous system feel safe, I guess I'll say. And that relationship became progressively really abusive, physically, emotionally. That's when I started drinking like at least every day. At least every day I was drinking. I was working at IHOP at the time, and I was thinking about this the other day. But what was I gonna say? But yeah, so I was working at IHOP and I was 19 or 20 at the time. And this was the first job, first place I'd ever felt like a part of. Like I felt like they were my family. We were all like so similar. And I find it funny because I used to call IHOP the International House of Probation and Parole. And I was the only one without the record. So if that says anything about me, like that's where I was fitting in. Um, and that job, I mean, that job was, I went from just being like a dishwasher, an expo, and a host all the way up to assistant manager. I assistant managed that IHOP for about 2.5 years. I got a lot of interesting experiences and stories because I worked the night shift. I worked overnight because the Boise one's open all night long. Um, and that time, so I was in an abusive relationship. I was in pretty much a toxic work environment, even though I like fit in quite well, right? Because I was a little bit toxic. But things really started to fall apart, and my mom confronted me one day outside my apartment about my drinking. I was bragging that I could like take 8 shots and be like totally fine. Like I could, my mom's like, Shara, like that's concerning. That's not something you should be bragging about. And I was like, well, I brag about it to all my friends because they drank like I did, right? Um, and I feel like that seed started to get planted there right at about that point. Because my mom was a really big part of my life, even though she struggled with her mental health. She's a survivor, she's a fighter. And I value her opinion and her thoughts on a lot of things, even though we think differently on a lot of things too. Um, and so that like seed kind of got planted. And at that point, I was drinking 7 days a week. I wasn't drinking in the morning yet, but I was drinking 7 days a week. And I decided I was going to leave that abusive relationship. And so I left, and I still wasn't willing to admit that I had, or that I was an alcoholic. I was willing to admit that I had a drinking problem. And I started to go see a counselor who essentially helped me moderate my drinking and that made rules about my drinking. So at that point, I went from 7 days to 6 days to 5 days to 4 days to 3 days to 2 days to one over like a period of like 2 months. I worked on that to getting down to that. And then I started making the rules. I would never drink clear Cruzan rum because that would make me immediately black out when I would put that into my body. So I can't drink that. I only drink tequila or, like beer, whatever delusional thoughts I was having at that point. And then I wouldn't drink alone because I was a big alone drinker. Didn't have a lot of friends growing up. I was the black sheep, the outcast. And so a lot of my alcoholism was spent alone or in a relationship. And so I said I wouldn't drink alone and I wouldn't drink at home. And so then I had all of these rules around my drinking that, they allowed me to keep drinking, and things to not get super bad quite yet. But it was probably about 2 years into making those rules. So I was about 20, I think I was like 25, 25, 24, 25 at that point. Um, and like it worked for a while. And then I started getting like blackout drunk when I was with my friends out at the bar. And I had my two best friends that I had met, one at IHOP and then I met one at another place that I had worked at. And they both cut me off like within a year of each other. My friend Tess had to let me go because I was acting obsessive and crazy and trying to put more on her than she was willing to hold, and that's totally fair. And then my friend Alice had to let me go because I was acting a fool and honestly kind of aggro one night when we were out. And that was like a really big chip on my shoulder. I've had a lot of issues with abandonment in my life, feeling abandoned. And so that was difficult for me to lose the only two friends I had really made since I was in junior high, and I didn't have any friends back then really, none that followed me into my adulthood. So I had some more seeds planted that like maybe I've got some issues. And then I got pregnant. And I got pregnant and I went 9 months without a drink. But the second my son came out, suddenly all those rules I had about my drinking, I couldn't apply anymore. Like I couldn't not drink alone. I couldn't, like I was drinking alone. Here I am again, drinking alone in the basement of my mom's house. And slowly and progressively, like that just kind of got worse because I didn't have those rules that I could hold to myself anymore. And my mom ended up selling her house in Mountain Home, Idaho, and then we moved out to Michigan at this point. And then a really terrible and traumatic event happened between my mom and she got very physically aggressive with me while my son was sleeping in his bedroom. And I I knew that this wasn't going to work. I knew that this wasn't going to work living with her. And so I ended up fleeing back to Montana and I came to live in Hamilton with my son's paternal grandparents. They took me in under their wing and they, really helped me so much with so many things. And I'm really grateful for, what they gave me during that time. And when I moved into their house, I tried to remoderate my drinking again. Because I didn't want them to see it. I didn't want them to know like where I was at. And so I did. I did it pretty well, I think. Maybe I'm delusional on that too, but and then I ended up getting my own place down in Hamilton, and then it kicked back up again. And because of the situation that happened with my mom, I was dealing with a lot of abandonment. Um, and that's when the drinking started in the morning. I got up in the morning and I had to drink. And I'd try to make sure that I was drinking enough to have enough in my system, but not too drunk so I could continue to take care of my kid. Because I was a single mom at that point in time. His dad was still living in Boise, Idaho. And he eventually did move back that year in 2022 in about May. So yeah, so I was drinking every day. I was having the shakes and I didn't even really know what was going on. I didn't really know a whole lot about alcoholism. I just knew that my family had addictive tendencies and that I should stay away from it. But because my direct line of parents didn't have alcoholism, I just don't think I had a grasp on how bad it could be and what it looked like when it was getting to that point. And so, yeah, so in June of 2022, um, I had a friend, and he was like, hey, he was sober. He's like, I'm not saying like you have a drinking problem, but like maybe you could like come to this meeting with me and just like sit and listen. And I was like, I was probably drinking at the time too. I'm like thinking about it, I was like, yeah, I was definitely at least a truly or two in. Um, and I still was like, you know what? Sure, okay, like I'll come. And so I went to my first step meeting. That was down in Corvallis at this little church. And when I went into that meeting, I heard a lot of yes. There was a lot of old timers there telling their stories, their experience, sharing their experience, strength, and hope. But when I left that meeting, I still had this painted picture of what I thought an alcoholic was, and because I hadn't hit any of those yet, um, I was like, well, I'm not an alcoholic. Like alcoholics, they lose their job, they lose custody of their kid, they, have and they're in trouble with the law. I don't have any DUIs, all of these things. But I didn't understand that this is a YET program, that this is truly a progressive disease. And anything that another alcoholic has talked about in these rooms, I'm just as capable of doing if I go back out. Just because I haven't done it yet doesn't mean I won't. But I still, again, delusional. I was like, but yeah, I think I got a drinking problem for sure. Like I got to figure that out. And so again, I made another giant life change because something that my mom taught me really well is when people, places, and things aren't working for you, you just run. You just pick up your stuff and you run. And so I watched her do that a lot. And so there were some other issues going on. My son's father had moved back to the Hamilton area, and I was completely breaking down from the alcohol use, among the abandonment issues, and an undiagnosed mental illness that I had. And I decided it would be a great idea to move back in with my mom all the way over in Michigan. And so that's what I did. And I remember when I made the decision, like I made a whole pros and cons list of it, and I sat down my son's father and his mom, and I like told them what I was feeling and doing. At the time, my son's father was not on the birth certificate yet. So, I had quote unquote full quote custody. We'll find out that that's not really how it works. And so I took my son and I left and I moved to Michigan 2 weeks after telling them that I was going to be leaving. And when I got to Michigan to my mom's house on July 4th, there was an officer standing outside, and there was my son's father, just a car down. And there was paperwork being handed to me that demanded that I hand over custody of my son to his father and he go back to Montana. And being the alcoholic that I am, I didn't do that. I was like, no, I'm going to keep him. I'm not going to do this. You're not on the birth certificate. Like, you don't have those rights. And it wasn't that I kept him off the birth certificate. Like I tried to get him on it several times, but he wanted to go different routes. Like I had an Amazon DNA test that I ended up getting done just so we could make sure it was his. And that was used against me in court to take him away, even though like it said right on the Amazon DNA test, like this is not like it hasn't gone through the proper chain of custody. It does not uphold in court. But due to my, I would say manic like behavior, um, that was pretty prevalent, even though they didn't really know a whole lot about my drinking at that point, but I was pretty manic, to a degree and just making really impulsive decisions that weren't in the best interest for my son, if I'm being 100% honest. Um, and so I refused, and then I kept my son, for about a month. And then I got a letter, or I got court paperwork again from the judge this time saying if I wasn't back in Montana with my son to hand him over, that I would be put in handcuffs and taken to jail. And I had to be there for a court date too. And I was given 48 hours notice to get from Michigan all the way back to Montana. So my mom and I made the trek again from from Michigan to Montana. And I sat in that courtroom and I handed over custody of my son. Um, and and then I really felt like I didn't have any support here or a choice. At the time, they were my son's grandparents and my son's father were really trying to encourage me to stay, um, and to not go back to Michigan. And I just felt like I didn't have anybody here. I had a really hard time making friends at that point in my life. And I remember I have to go back to this point real quick because I feel like it's super important. But when I sat down with that pros and cons list, my son's paternal grandmother looked at me and she said, Shara, she was like, have you ever been happy? Have you ever been happy anywhere? And I remember being so mad, so angry with her. Um, but I came to realize that like she was right. Like I wasn't happy. I'd never been happy anywhere. Because wherever I run, I go with me. So I can't escape myself, unfortunately and fortunately. But yeah, and so then I once again made the trek from Michigan or from Montana to Michigan. See, I go back and forth a lot. Like you can see. And when I got back to Montana, or when I got back to Michigan, after that first step meeting, the only thing I took from that meeting was it's not the third drink, the fifth drink, or the ninth drink, it's the first drink. Um, and so even though I wasn't willing to admit that I was powerless over alcohol and my life had become unmanageable, I was again willing to admit that I had a drinking problem. And so I stopped, for my first step meeting all the way through losing custody of my son, going back and forth. And I went back to Michigan, because I don't know, like I just did. And when I got back there, I was working a factory job, where I like put parts together. And I met this girl, and immediately I was like became obsessed with her because I'm an alcoholic, and I have an obsessive brain. And we ended up becoming really close friends. And then we ended up dating. And she was an alcoholic as well. And I didn't know, one, I didn't know how to kick people out of my life or say this isn't healthy for me and I can't do this. So I allowed her to continue to be around me and I allowed her to continue to drink, but I didn't drink. And then from June of my first step meeting all the way until November 4th, I didn't pick up a drink. And I relapsed November 4th. Um, I was sitting with her at a storage unit and we were cleaning the storage unit out. And my son's father had canceled a video call on me. And I was irritable, restless, discontent, and just completely distraught. Um, and we were sitting there, and this girl, she pulls out, she had lots of bottles of alcohol in the storage unit. Lots. And so she pulled one out and she's like, well, I'm gonna drink. And I had asked her to stop drinking at this point around me. Um, and she pulled it out and it was Swallow vodka. Never been a vodka drinker, never liked vodka, just not my thing. But that night I was so distraught that I picked up a drink and I started drinking and it was off to the races again. That night was like, I think like it's funny looking back at it because I would have thought that that night would have been enough to really wake me up to see how much my alcoholism is affecting me and the people around me. But unfortunately, that really wasn't the case. I got really drunk and I showed up. I drove my car back to my mom's house where I was living. And I got in a huge fight with my mom. And then I got back in the car and tried to drive off really fast and like backed over some trash cans. And I remember my mom didn't, I held my alcohol so well that people didn't know I was drinking. I was also just a very emotional person. So it was kind of hard to see the drinking, I think, as well. I didn't know how to regulate my emotions. Um, and that night I ended up making, because this girl was with me, her and I got into a fight. And then I remember making her pull off to the side of the road. And I proceeded to get out and I took this big men's curve cologne. And I took it out into the middle of the field and I just started slamming it against the top of my head. It was pretty brutal. There was a lot of blood. And I refused to go to the hospital. And so my friend who was with me, she took care of me. And I have this, like, there's not a whole lot I remember from that night, but I remember that incident. And then I remember her sticking me in a Meyer cart, which is like an Albertsons, but out in Michigan. She stuck me in a Meyer cart, wheeled me to the pharmacy section so we could find bleed stop to make my head stop bleeding. This is like 45 minutes later, too. Um, and yeah, and so like here I am, like really traumatizing this girl too. And and then like the drinking really just didn't stop from that point on. And since I already got some of those yets, right? I lost custody of my son. Then I lost my car after I had that incident. Again, I didn't get a DUI, but that car was in my mom's name. So she took the car from me. Um, and so I had a few yets left to come. So I figured, well, hell, why don't we just bottom all the way out then, you know? So not long after November 4th, about a week later, I told my mom that I was moving out and I was moving in with this girl, but I didn't tell her the whole truth. And the whole truth is that I decided it'd be a good idea to live in a storage unit. So that's where we were at, and we were living in this storage unit, and the this relapse lasted about a month. Because then the night of my last drunk, it was a pretty traumatic incident, and I won't get all into that. But I had called my mom to come help me with what was going on. And my mom loves me so much that she just always wanted to help me and to be there for me. But she was also an enabler in my life and in my drinking because she helped save me from so many rock bottoms that I would have hit. But that night, my mom came to help me and she took me and this girl to the hospital because this girl needed to go into the hospital. And my mom, I remember barely enough from this night, but I remember that my mom was trying to get me to check myself into the psych ward or to treatment. I was just making this huge scene outside this hospital, and there's two cops. Um, and I don't know why I didn't get arrested that night. Like it still blows my mind that I didn't. But my mom ended up leaving. She ended up getting in her car and realizing that she couldn't help me. There was nothing that she could do for me anymore. And so she left, and then the cops let me leave. I was like blackout drunk. And so I wandered into, it was called Lake Orion in Michigan. I wandered into this city that I didn't know, completely blackout drunk, while the only person I did know that knew the area was inside in the emergency room. For whatever reason, she had a bad feeling. And so she had a gown on and she, I guess, got her clothes back on and she left the hospital. She left the emergency room to come find me. Apparently she drove around for like a couple of hours showing my photo to gas station people, asking, and she was also drunk at that point too. Um, and she said, I found out later because I never really asked, but I found out later that she had found me in a ditch and I was laying there. And then she took me back to the storage unit and I drank some more. And then that morning, I woke up and it was like all of my life had been drained out of me. Like I just didn't have anything left. Like the gift of desperation was certainly there. I had lost everything, and it was either kill yourself or get sober because that's all I was doing with my drinking was I didn't want to be here anymore. I was too afraid to, actually do it. And so I woke up that morning and there was this little voice in my head that said, Shara, we don't have to do this. We don't have to do it this way. This isn't the way. So I called my mom again and I told her, listen, I'll do whatever you ask of me. Will you please meet me down at this mental health place that I'm going to take myself to, um, and get this sorted out? And she said, you know what? She said, yes, Shara, I will help you. Cause that was the first time I ever asked for help with my alcoholism and was willing to admit that I had a real problem. Um, and so, yeah, she did that. And then I spent the next 16 months in Michigan away from my son, only doing video calls, and doing intensive dialectical behavioral therapy and EMDR. But I refused to come into the rooms of AA because of the God thing. Just couldn't do it. Well, the girl that I was with and continued to be in a relationship with, she had tried to stay sober, but then at the end of 2023, she relapsed. And of course, I'm an alcoholic, so I have to try to control everything. So I told her, in order for this relationship to work, you have to go to all these AA meetings and do all this. Well, that's what kind of brought me back into the program was her. Um, and so I'm really grateful. I'm really grateful for that. So then I had started to make a plan to get back to Montana so I could be reunited with my son. I was at a point where I felt safe enough. I had over a year sobriety and I was ready to get back here, even though I had a lot of shit to face when I did get here. And so I made the trek again from Michigan to Montana, hopefully the last time. Gosh. Um, and I got here and I remember that I had this whole plan. I made sure I had the therapist that I needed when I got here. I had a job when I got here. I had a place to live when I got here, and I had already looked up all the meetings. Um, and so I knew that the second anything went wrong, I would be here. Well, first night I was here, guess what? Something bad happened. And I found myself downtown trying to find the 8 p.m. meeting. Um, when I finally found it, because it can be so hard to find when you're new to town, I was like, what is this creepy basement? I was like, okay, I see the AA symbol, so I think I'm gonna be okay. But I sat down and they asked if there's anybody from out of town visitors, and I raised my hand. And my story just kind of takes off from there. Like my whole life changed. My whole life changed, and my outlook on life changed. Like I was so angry at my son's father and his mom for so long. I started to see the gratitude that I should have for how they helped support my son while I was bottoming out, and being grateful that he wasn't with me when I was bottoming out and he was safe. So like my perspective on that ended up changing. And then I had to start supervised visitation down at Planet Kids to see my son again, and get a psych eval. So I saw him for 3 months inside the center and I got a psych eval. And then that was lifted on July 4th again. another July 4th. I have a lot of those. It's weird, synchronicity and all. And I got to have him for the first time on July 4th of 2024 outside the center. And then, it's like everything that I've gotten today is because of the program of Alcoholics Anonymous. I wouldn't have gotten anywhere. Because when I was still showed up and I came to Montana, I was still restless, irritable, discontent. I was a dry drunk. I was angry. I was full of rage, resentment. And that kind of slowly drifted away. Slowly. Slowly. But then, like I had my son and I had a sponsor and I'm working the program and the steps and I had a good job. I was working down at Liquid Planet as their head prep chef. And stuff looked really good, really good. And then I had to turn for the worse on my health. And that was a really big struggle because a lot of the things that happened in my drinking started to happen in my life again, but not necessarily like within my control. Because my health got so bad and I didn't know what was going on with me. And so I at the time I had lost my job at Liquid Planet and I was desperately trying to find another job. And on Indeed one day it said they were looking for a supervised visitation monitor at Planet Kids. And I thought, what are the chances? I did a lot of work since then. It was about a year later. So I applied. And then I got hired as a supervised visitation monitor at that same center that I had to see my son at. Being able to help those kids and help those parents was just such a blessing to me and total full circle, right? Like how crazy life is in sobriety and in emotional sobriety. And like that job really helped me and changed me in so many ways. It gave me a lot of confidence to really it was like almost like a little like trophy for how hard I had worked on my program and my mental health and to be here for my son. It was a great job. I don't work there anymore. I work at Watson's Children's Shelter. I work as a youth counselor. That's where my heart really is. That's the kind of work that I want to be doing. And so that was a great stepping stone for me. And then through that process as well, I was able to consider going back to school. And so I was setting that up and I'll be going the university full time this next fall. And I'm really excited for that. But I know I keep saying this, but I'm like thinking about it, like really everything that I have today is because of this program and the people in these rooms and the support that I've been given. Because I was the black sheep that didn't have anybody and I didn't want anybody for a really long time. I never thought that I would be black and white. I never thought that I would be somebody that I am today, that I would be standing here speaking in front of a group of people and not completely freaking out because I was the person who went and hid in their car every lunch break at work because I just didn't want to talk to anybody. I didn't want to get close to anybody. And it's interesting to see that change in me, to see this social butterfly come out, because this is who I really am. Like the trauma just really dragged me down, and it kept me from being the person that I wanted to be. And the alcoholism kind of helped be a catalyst for that. And um, yeah, and so today I work at Watson's Children's Shelter. I love my job. I love being able to help these kids and these parents go through these difficult times and having all of this lived perspective on it. And I get to have my son pretty much whenever I want him, which is such a different thing to say because it's been a lot of work to get here, including with his dad. To continue to show him that I'm sober and I mean business. I mean business. And so that's amazing. I had some stuff fall apart last year. And stuff got really hard and I had a really hard time opening up and being vulnerable to the people around me, even though I knew everybody cared about me. But I did open up to somebody and she really helped me. She gave me a place to live when I kind of lost my place because of losing my job, of my letter of accommodations with my disability. Um, and now me and my son have a 2-bedroom place, and it's perfect. And he's got people and he's got other friends to play with in the neighborhood. Just everything turned out way better than I ever expected it to. And that's because today I also have such a unique relationship with my higher power. My higher power guides me, my higher power loves me, me and my higher power, we're real tight. We're real tight. Um, and I think that, giving up a lot of things to my higher power and then being vulnerable in these rooms has gotten me places that I didn't think were possible. So vulnerability is such a beautiful thing, and it's not something that I found a lot outside of this program. Um, and yeah, yeah, how could I not see that life was unmanageable? How could I not see that it was and that it could be like it was today? Because there's just a lot of nevers in my story. I never thought I'd get here. I never thought I'd be an alcoholic. I never thought I would lose all those things. That wasn't me, right? That was you. That's not me. Um, but today, when I introduce myself as a grateful alcoholic, I really mean that. I'm really grateful to be an alcoholic. I'm grateful that I set aside my delusions and took the cotton out of my ears, even after moving here, to realize how much of an alcoholic I was. I have had a lot of people comment on how much I've changed. And so I think I'll just touch on that before I end. When I moved here, I had black hair. I wore all black all the time. And I remember my sponsor at the time when I was decorating my apartment, she goes, "Oh," because it was all colorful. She was like, "Oh." She's like, "I like this." And I was like, "Yeah, yeah, I kind of like it too." Um, and then I changed. I started wearing colors. I started being a bright and happy person. I just started being me. And I look very different today than when a lot of you met me originally. And I find that kind of cool. Because you get to see how much I've changed and how much my personality has changed because of this program. Um, and I'm happy to be who I am today. I was looking in the mirror this morning and I was like, man, it's like, I don't want to run away. I don't want to run away. My life still is unmanageable sometimes. You know, that's why I continue to stay in this program. That's why I have sponsees. That's why I have a sponsor. That's why I have a service position, which took me a while to really throw myself into the program. But I'm really glad that I went full in because the things I get from my sponsees, it's just incredible. You know, if you want to stay sober, or if you want to get a sponsor, or never mind. Words are hard. But if you want to get sober, get a sponsor. If you want to stay sober, get sponsees. And I really didn't know how big that was until I did get them, because it's beautiful watching other people change in this program the longer that you stay, and get to see where they're going. And I'm just so glad that I get to be a part of their journey and they get to be a part of mine. And I'm just really grateful for everybody in this room and for all of the things that you guys have done for me, and you don't even know some of it, you know? And I I'm just I'm just, I don't live in pink clouds anymore. Life's not strawberry and orgasms all the time. But I know how to live life on life's terms now. Things happen and I don't let it completely break me down and let me catastrophize and live in victimhood anymore. And that's a really beautiful place for me. And I'm going to stay in these rooms. I'm going to keep sitting. I'm going to keep reaching out to the newcomer. I'm going to keep doing all of those things because my program has to be first, and I've learned that the hard way. So, I think that's all I've got. But thank you guys again. I really, really appreciate being